You're stuck in traffic on a Tuesday afternoon, and the motorhome in the next lane has curtains in the windows and a bicycle on the back. Somebody lives in there, full time, and they are not poor. They may be freer than you are. Here's the part nobody says out loud. Millions of Americans have quietly walked away from the mortgage, the property tax bill, and the utility company, and most of them are spending less in a month than you spend in a single week keeping a house you barely see in daylight. I did not believe it either. I found out the hard way that the whole thing was built to keep me paying forever. By the end of this, I will show you a document from 1976 that quietly opened up 245 million acres of American land where a person can legally stay for free. And you do not need to sell your house or quit your life to use what I am about to share. You can start tonight with what you already own. I want to take you back to the first time this cracked open for me. I was parked outside a hardware store in a small desert town, eating a gas station sandwich in my car, feeling sorry for myself about a heating bill. An older man in the next spot was sitting in a folding chair beside a small trailer, drinking coffee from a real mug, reading a paperback in the sun. I asked him, half joking, how much his place cost him a month. He said without looking up, "About what you paid for that sandwich and your gas today." I laughed. He did not. That man ruined my comfortable assumptions, and I have never been the same. So I started digging, and what I found was not some new fad invented by influencers with camera drones. This is old. This is nearly 100 years old, and it worked long before it was cool. Let me tell you about a group of people almost nobody remembers. In the winter of 1919, a handful of families drove their early automobiles down into Florida and parked together at DeSoto Park in Tampa. They had built little sleeping boxes and camp kitchens onto their cars. They called themselves the Tin Can Tourists because they cooked out of tin cans and heated them right on the engine manifold. Their secret handshake was a tin can soldered to the radiator cap. It sounds quaint. It was not quaint. It was one of the first organized movements of Americans who figured out they could live well, travel the whole country, and spend almost nothing doing it. By the middle of the 1920s, tens of thousands of families were doing this. They were not homeless. Doctors did it, teachers did it, retired couples did it. They discovered something the rest of the country would spend the next 100 years forgetting on purpose. A home does not have to cost you the rest of your working life. Shelter, warmth, and a dry bed are cheap. It is everything we bolted onto them that got expensive. I sat with that thought for a long time because I had a house. And when I actually added up what that house took from me every single month, I felt something close to anger. That is where this story turns, and I need you to stay with me, because this is the part that changed how I see my own front door. Here is what I did. I sat down at my kitchen table with 2 years of bank statements, and I added up every dollar that left my hands purely to keep a roof over my head. Not food, not the car, just the roof. The mortgage, the property tax, the homeowner's insurance, the heating, the cooling, the water bill, the trash pickup, the endless small repairs, the lawn nobody walked on. When I finished, I sat there staring at the number, and I honestly checked my math 3 times because I did not want it to be true. I was spending more than half of everything I earned just to own a place I slept in and left every morning. More than half. And the mortgage part, the part I thought of as buying something, was mostly interest in those early years. On a 30-year loan at the rates most people carry, you can end up paying nearly double the price of the house by the time you are done. You buy the home once, you pay for it twice, and the bank keeps the difference. Now here is the thing that took me years to understand, and it is not an accident that I never understood it. Back in the early 1900s, most working families either owned a modest home outright or rented cheaply, and mortgages were short. Then, over the middle of the last century, the long 30-year mortgage became the standard American path, sold to everyone as the dream, and it is a good deal for somebody, just maybe not for the person signing the papers. I am not telling you a house is worthless. I am telling you that somewhere along the way, the cost of simply being sheltered got quietly detached from what shelter actually costs to provide, and almost none of us ever stopped to check the difference. The families in 1919 checked, They looked at the whole arrangement and said, "No, thank you. I will keep my money." And for a while, a lot of Americans agreed with them. So what happened to all those people living cheap and free on wheels? Why did that knowledge fade out of ordinary life until we all forgot it was ever normal? That is where it gets uncomfortable. And I want to be careful and fair about it, because the answer is not a cartoon villain. It is something quieter and, honestly, more effective than any villain. After the Second World War, this country made a decision. We poured money and law and advertising into one single idea of what a successful life looked like. A detached house on a lot with a lawn, financed over 30 years, filled with appliances bought on credit, in a place zoned so that nothing else was even allowed. Whole towns were built where it was literally against the local rules to live any other way. You could not legally park a livable trailer on your own land and stay in it. You could not build small. You could not share. The rules pushed everyone toward the most expensive possible version of shelter and then called it freedom. And the trailer, the humble, affordable, movable home that had let ordinary families keep their money, got a new reputation almost overnight. It stopped being the clever choice of doctors and teachers and became a punchline, a symbol of poverty, something to be ashamed of. That shame was not an accident either. It is very hard to sell a family a home that costs them everything if the cheap version parked down the road looks perfectly comfortable and the neighbors seem happy. I felt that shame myself when I first started looking into this. My gut reaction was, that is not for people like me. And I had to ask myself where that reaction even came from, because when I traced it back, I realized I had never once questioned it. I had just absorbed it the way you absorb the temperature of a room. So let me pull you out of that room for a minute, because I know exactly what a lot of you are thinking right now. You are thinking, this is fine for some retired fellow in the desert, but I am not selling my house. I have a family. I have a job. I have roots. I am not going to go live in a can on wheels, and no video is going to talk me into it. Good. I am not trying to. I did not either. Because here is what I actually learned, and it is the part that matters even if you never spend a single night in an RV in your life. The real secret of these people was never the wheels. The wheels are just the dramatic part. The real secret was that they learned how to be warm, comfortable, and self-sufficient, using almost no money and no dependence on the systems that bill you every month. And every one of those tricks works inside a normal house. I know, because I started testing them in mine, one at a time, like a skeptic trying to prove the old man with the coffee mug wrong. Let me give you one you can do tonight with things you already have that cost you nothing. Go look at your windows after dark. In most homes, especially older ones, a shocking amount of your heating and cooling money walks straight out through the glass. Glass is a terrible barrier against temperature. The old trailer folks knew this in their bones, because they lived in thin metal boxes and could not afford to waste a single degree of warmth. So here is what they did, and what I now do every winter. At night, you cover the glass. Not the whole window forever. Just the glass. At night, when the sun is not helping you, the cheapest version costs nothing. You take any spare blanket, quilt, or heavy curtain you already own, and you hang it over the window at night, close to the glass, with a gap at the top and bottom so it does not trap damp against the pane. That still layer of trapped air is the whole trick. Warmth does not like to cross still air. In the summer, you flip the logic, you keep the glass covered during the hottest part of the day on the sunny side of the house, and you open everything up at night when the air outside turns cool and free. I tested this in one room for a month with a cheap thermometer. That one room held its warmth noticeably longer after the heat cut off, and my furnace kicked on less often to keep it there. Multiply that across a whole house, across a whole winter, and you are talking about real money month after month from a stack of blankets you already own. Here's a second one, and this is the one that made me feel a little foolish for never thinking of it. Water. Specifically, hot water, which in most homes is one of the biggest silent energy costs there is. The trailer folks and the old thrift manuals all understood something we forgot. You do not need to heat a giant tank of water all day and all night waiting for the moment you might want some. In an RV, you heat water when you need it and not before. You can bring a slice of that same discipline into any house tonight. Turn the temperature on your water heater down a notch. Most are set far hotter than anyone needs, hot enough to scald, and every degree hotter costs you money to maintain around the clock. Insulate the tank and the first few feet of hot pipe with a cheap wrap or even old towels. Take shorter showers with the lived-in awareness that hot water is not free rain from the sky. It is a bill running in real time. That feeling is not despair. That feeling is the beginning of getting your money and your independence back. If you want to go deeper into every method I have described here, and quite a few more that did not fit into a single video, I put all of it into a series of books called First Foundations, Deep Frugal, in Full Stack. They cover the practical side, room by room and bill by bill, in the same honest, no purchase required spirit as everything you just heard. You can find the link in the description below. Now, with that foundation in mind, let me take you into the part of this story that most people never even get close to. None of this requires expertise. None of it requires a purchase you cannot make at a dollar store or skip entirely. It requires only the one thing the whole modern arrangement quietly trained out of us, which is the habit of asking, wait, do I actually need to be paying for this? Or was I just told to? And once you start asking that question, you cannot stop. That is what happened to me. I fixed the windows, I fixed the water, and then I stood in my kitchen one evening and looked at the biggest cost of all, the one I had accepted as unchangeable, and I thought, what if that one is negotiable too? Because here is the tension that had been building in me for months. If a person can be warm without the utility company and clean without the utility company, then what exactly is the house for? What am I really paying that enormous monthly number to protect? And that question led me straight into the part of this that genuinely shocked me. The part that the people living full-time on wheels understand and the rest of us never even glimpse. Let me explain how these people actually live, because this is where my last few assumptions fell apart. I assumed anyone living in an RV was tethered to campgrounds, paying nightly fees, basically renting a parking spot forever, which did not sound free at all. That is what I pictured. Pull into a crowded lot, pay $40 or $50 a night, plug into their power, fill up their water, and dump into their sewer, on their schedule, by their rules. If that were the whole story, it would just be a smaller, uglier version of the same trap. But that is not how the serious ones do it, and learning the difference is what finally made me understand what these people had actually recovered. The people who have truly cut the cord run their own tiny utilities. A few solar panels on the roof turn sunlight directly into the electricity they need, stored in a battery, no monthly bill, no meter, no company. Their water lives in a tank they fill for free or nearly free, and they have learned to make a small amount go a very long way. Because when you can see your whole water supply with your own eyes, you stop wasting it without even trying. Their heat often comes from a small propane heater or a tiny wood stove that costs pennies to run. They collect, they store, they conserve, and they answer to nobody's billing cycle. And when I understood that, I finally understood what the old man with the coffee mug had really been telling me. His low cost of living was not because he was suffering or doing without. It was because he had taken back ownership of the three things every household needs: power, water, and warmth. And he had shrunk them down to a scale one person could actually own and control. The rest of us rent those three things at markup forever, and we call it normal. Now here is what stopped me cold. Every single one of those skills, solar, water storage, conservation, small-scale heat, scales right back down into an ordinary home. You can put a small solar setup on a normal roof. You can catch rainwater. You can heat one room instead of a whole empty house. The RV people did not invent anything. They just rediscovered self-sufficiency under pressure, because a small space forces you to be honest about waste in a way a big house lets you hide from forever. But even after I understood all of that, one enormous question was still standing there, unanswered. And it is probably the same question sitting in your mind right now. Fine, say you have a rig. Say you have your own power and water and heat. Where do you actually put it? Because land costs money. A parking spot costs money. Surely, I thought, this is the catch. This is where the freedom quietly turns back into a bill. Surely there is no such thing as a place in America where a person can simply exist legally for free. That is exactly what I thought. And that is exactly where I was wrong and where I found the thing I most want to give you before we finish. I want to tell you how I found it, because it did not come from any modern video or any influencer. It came from an old public land document, the kind of thing almost nobody reads. And the moment I understood what it actually said, I had to stand up and walk around the room. For years, I assumed all land in America was owned by somebody, and that anywhere you stopped, sooner or later someone would come to collect. Then I stumbled onto the fact that the federal government of the United States holds hundreds of millions of acres of public land, land that belongs, on paper, to all of us. And I found the law that governs it. It is called the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, and it was signed in 1976. Dry name, quiet law, enormous consequence. Under the management that grew out of that law, the Bureau of Land Management oversees roughly 245 million acres of public land, most of it across the western United States. And on huge stretches of that land, there is a practice with an ugly bureaucratic name and a beautiful meaning. It is called dispersed camping. In plain words, it means that on much of this public land, you are allowed to pull off, set up, and stay for free. No campground, no nightly fee, no hookups, and no bill. The typical rule, and it varies by area, so you always check the local office, is that you can stay in one spot for up to 14 days within a given window, and then you are asked to move on, often just a short distance, so that no one person camps a place to death and the land stays healthy for the next person. 14 days. On land you already, in a sense, own a tiny share of as a citizen. I read that rule 3 times before I believed it. I had spent my whole adult life assuming that simply existing on the earth required a monthly payment to somebody, and here was a nearly 50-year-old law quietly saying, no, some of this country still belongs to the people, and the people are allowed to rest on it. That is the piece almost nobody in my life had ever heard. When I told friends, most of them flatly did not believe me, the same way I had not believed the man with the coffee mug. They had absorbed the same assumption I had, that every square foot of America has a meter on it. It does not. There are places, legal, real, and vast, where the meter has never been installed, and the law from 1976 is the reason. Now, let me be honest and fair, because I promised you the truth and not a fantasy. This is not a loophole to live in one beautiful spot forever for nothing. It is not a permanent free address. It is a rotation. You stay your days, you keep it clean, you leave it better than you found it, and you move to the next place. And there are more places than any one person could visit in years of trying. It rewards exactly the kind of person the tin can tourists were back in 1919. Self-reliant, respectful, carrying their own power and water and warmth. Owing nobody, that is not a poverty trap. That is the oldest form of American freedom there is, and it was written back into law within our own lifetimes, and almost none of us were ever told. And here is why this matters, even if you never drive a single mile onto public land. Because the moment you know it exists, the spell breaks. You can no longer quite believe the story that the only respectable, allowed, normal way to live is the most expensive one. Once you have seen that there is legal, open country where a prepared person can rest for free, every oversized bill you pay for the privilege of merely existing starts to look like a choice instead of a law of nature. And a choice is something you can change. That is what these people recovered. Not just cheap living. They recovered the knowledge that the expensive way was never the only way, and that most of what we pay for shelter is not shelter at all. It is the story we were sold about shelter. So let me bring it all the way back to you, standing at your own window tonight, or sitting in your own kitchen, adding up your own numbers the way I finally did. You do not have to sell anything. You do not have to buy a motorhome or drive into the desert or change your whole life this week. That was never the real lesson. The real lesson is the one the tin can tourists knew in 1919, the one the man with the coffee mug knew, the one hidden in a land law from 1976. Warmth is cheap. Water is cheap. Power is getting cheaper every year. Rest, on a big share of this country, is still free. And almost everything we pay on top of that, we pay because we were taught to, not because we truly had to. Cover your windows tonight. Turn down that water heater. Add up your own roof number the way I did, with your own bank statements, and let yourself feel whatever you feel when you see it. If you have read this far, you are already the kind of person this was made for. The kind who suspects, deep down, that a lot of useful, money-saving, life-simplifying knowledge did not just disappear on its own, but was quietly set aside because someone profited more from you never knowing it. You were right to suspect that. You were right all along. So here's what I want from you, and I am asking directly, because I know this crowd reads quietly and moves on. Tell me one thing in the comments. What is the single biggest bill you pay every month, just for the privilege of being sheltered? And had you ever, before today, seriously questioned it? Write it down below. I read them, and other people read them, and every honest answer helps someone else wake up to the same thing you just did. And if you want to keep recovering this kind of buried, practical knowledge, the methods our grandparents used without thinking and we somehow forgot, then come along with the rest of us who are digging it back up one piece at a time. Next, I am going to show you the forgotten way people kept food fresh for months with no electricity and no refrigerator at all, using nothing but the ground beneath their feet, and one simple principle the appliance companies would very much prefer you never rediscovered. It works. I tested it, and once you see it, you will never look at your electric bill the same way again. I hope this opened your eyes the way that desert conversation opened mine. Everything I just showed you was the overview. Inside my membership, the Old Ways Almanac, I take you all the way through the Hidden Freedom Playbook, the part where this video stopped. In there, you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers. You're not doing this alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime. One click.